Access 2007 Database Tools. The whole goal of this nugget is for you to be a proactive administrator. No doubt if you're creating all this data, you're creating tables, forms, reports, macros, and other items, you are going to have other people that need to access your information, and this information is probably very important. So you want to be able to do what you can to make it work the best that it can, which includes backing up that data. You might have someone that deletes records and you need to bring them back, or you might have some corruption in your current database, therefore you need to restore that backup. Speaking of corruption, there is a repair tool that might be able to fix any type of data problems before you have to restore that backup. And there are tons of options that exist within Access, from simply changing the way that it is viewed by your users to being able to convert information or work with add-ins, other programs that can really help to make your database application as fantastic as it can be. So we are going to go back into Microsoft Access. We are in our Zoo database, and we're first going to concentrate on this Database Tools ribbon. Some of these tools are beyond the scope of this nugget, including Visual Basic and some of the security items. We are going to have a nugget that is focused just on security, so we'll come back to the ones that we skip here. First of all, relationships. We've looked at this before. This is all the tables that exist within our database. We can show tables and add more to our view if we want to, but we see the one-to-many relationships, and this is what's going to enforce our database integrity. I'll close this view. Back to the database ribbon. We have object dependencies. It's very nice to be able to click on this to see, okay, if I want to delete the animal inventory database or the animal inventory table, what is that going to affect? Well, I'll be doggone, I have all these other objects that are based or depend on animal inventory. Therefore, I can't just get in and delete it or make changes. I may even have to delete a relationship to make changes to animal inventory, and then I could set that relationship back. You can also do the opposite of objects that depend on me. You could see objects that I depend on. Animal inventory depends on a few other tables: animal food, animals, habitat, and zookeepers. Object dependencies can be very important if you had a database, it's been there for a while, and you realize you want to make new tables, you want to split tables, and you really want to make changes to the underlying data. I'll close all these items by clicking the X's. And now let's go back to Database Tools and take a look at some of these Analyze tools that we have. One is the Database Documenter. With this, we can create a document that indicates the layout, the setup, what is making up this particular object. It's very good if you're going through migration, if you're upgrading. People who went from Access 2003 to Access 2007 may have put this into play. It's not new to Access 2007. I always recommend documenting applications that are far, far reaching. So let's say I want to document my animal food and my animal inventory. I can select those. I could even go into options and see what it is that I'd like to see included in this document. I want to see the properties, relationships. I don't have any permissions at this point in time. I would like to see all the information regarding the fields and the indexes. I'd like to see all of that information as well. I'll select OK to close options and then OK to start the documenter. How quick was that? I can zoom in by clicking. I also have this nice little slider that allows me to work with the size. So it's telling me the location of this file. First, we're looking at the animal food table, and we can see all the various properties, when it was created, and we can see some of the items that we haven't set as properties. Now it breaks it down into columns. We have our food ID field. It's a long integer. The size is 4. And we have all of these items that we saw in design view of the table. So glean from that, anytime you get into the design of a table and you make changes, update the documents. You saw it was just a click of a button. you could just print this out and use it for later. Here are all the columns in that specific table. I'm going to go ahead and close this, and we're going to document another item. I'll click the Documenter. We have forms also. What happens if we try to document our vendor's form? Well, let's take a look at options. We have fewer options that exist here. Again, we don't need permissions. We can go into Properties and see what the print categories are, our format, our data, event, and other properties. I'll choose OK. I'll choose OK, and hey, I'll choose OK one more time. Here we go. We're taking a look at the documentation of our form here, vendors. So it's telling us all the different properties. So if we were to open up our vendor's form and look at the property sheet overall of the form, these are the items that we would see. I'm going to close this as well. And one more documenter. I want you to see that you also have current database. You could document and see the relationships of your entire database, and you can print these out. This is something that's very helpful with migration. And again, this exists in other versions of Access. You can take advantage of that if you're moving something that's already in existence into Access 2007. All right, let's take a look now at the next item on the list, which is your overall performance analyzer. How well are our food orders performing? Well, this is just an idea. It's good. We don't have any red exclamation mark or recommendations. Food orders. Change the data type of order ID from text to long integer. Oh yeah, that's a fantastic idea, but it's not our primary key, and it allows us to type in whatever we want that order ID to be, which would include perhaps letters as well as numbers. If I had a number of items here that Access was able to optimize, I could select them all and then choose Optimize, and it would make those changes for me. Of course, you can always go into Help and have some more information or explanations of what the analysis results really meant. I'll close this. We'll go back into that Performance Analyzer and take a look at the current database. I'd like to see the relationships. Are these as good as they could be? Okay. Animals import, relate this table to others. It's just a standalone item. I have a few of these items that haven't been related. Well, that makes sense, right? This was a training session, and we didn't necessarily have the need to put this into production. If I select this, notice these are ideas. It doesn't allow me to actually optimize or let Access do this for me. I'll choose Close. Now we have the Analyze Table, and we took a look at this in one of our nuggets that had to do with tables and creating tables. So I'm not going to take you through this except for letting you know that it's going to normalize your tables for you. It can look at a big block of a table that perhaps has too many fields and recommend how you can break it out, and it will even break it out for you, set up the relationships, and tie them back together as a query so you could still run it as a query and see what that whole base table looked like to begin with. It's a wizard. It will hold your hand. It will prompt you along. Cancel. Now let's take a look at moving data. If I had a SQL Server database, I can use that. I can take my Access database because it was small, it was just for the department, but it was so great that my whole company wants to use it now. Or I have so much data that Access just isn't performing for me. I could throw all of this into a SQL Server database, which is Microsoft's enterprise database, and I could work with it there. Either add it to a database that already exists within SQL Server or create a new one. It's a wizard, so it's going to take you through. Again, hold your hand. The key here is you have to have SQL Server set up somewhere where the computer that your Access database is stored on is able to reach it and therefore actually be migrated. I do not have SQL Server set up, so it's not going to work for me, but I could make the selection of where, and I could add my credentials, the login ID and the password, and I could determine what I'd like to call my new SQL Server database. I'll click Cancel. I also have the option here of splitting a database into two files. One would be for my base data, all those tables, and another one would be for my queries and my forms. So what's the value of that? Well, we can now have all of our data stored on a very secure and safe hard drive, but our users can be accessing a different area of that database. It's good if you run out of hard drive space as well. We'll hold all of these items here until the security nugget. This one is for add-ins, and we'll get to that when we take a look at our database options. Add-ins are programs you can download from places like Microsoft.com, which will give you additional functionality in whatever program you're adding them into. The administer, users and permissions will come back to in security, but this one right here, replication options. We could create a replica of this database, and what that's going to do is give us a second copy. Okay, so this is, hey, you have to close this before you create a replica. Do I want Access to close this database and create a replica? If I proceed, Access will close my database and convert it to a design master. The database may increase in size. A replica is good if you have people in many different locations. You want them to still access the same data, however, you don't want them to only hit one server. I can use this to copy my Access database to a branch office in, we'll say, San Francisco, and one into New York City. Then when I want to, I can synchronize all the different databases and I will have the same data. However, I don't have to have my users accessing data all in one location across a wide area network. It's good for network bandwidth, and if you synchronize it, as you'll see here, you have a choice to synchronize, then you will keep your information up to date. The Office button has many database tools as well. I could choose Save As if I'd like to save my 2007 database into an older format, such as 2003 or 2000. I can also Manage, which would allow me to compact and repair my database. What happens when you add records, delete records, add records, delete records is they move out of order, and sometimes it takes Access longer to find some of your information, or because your Access is a file that's stored on your hard drive, eventually all the different components of Access can be stored in different sectors on your hard drive. So it may take your server or your computer longer to piece that information back together. If you've ever worked with disk defragmenter for your operating system and all the data that exists on a computer, this is similar. However, it's only compacting your Access database. It's trying to push it back together and remove any what we refer to as white space, empty areas where data once was but now does not exist. Repair database is also something that can be handy. If you notice you're not able to open up a specific file when you were able to open it up yesterday, you can first try to repair that database. Again, this is in your Office button under Manage. Backing up a database is highly, highly important. The way I like to look at it is this information important enough that I need it? Probably it is. If it is, then you can choose Backup Database, which in essence is just the Save As dialog box. So you can choose a location to save it. I would recommend saving it to a different physical disk than where your main data is, because if you have a problem with that physical hard drive, or if you have a flood in your server room, or someone drops that computer, or someone steals that computer, you have lost all of your data, including your backup. So always try to back up your data to a different hard drive and even to a different computer. I even recommend backing it up to removable media that you can take off site if it's that important. Because if something happens to your office, you'll still have that data with you. And always keep in mind that data on that backup, if you're taking it off site, still needs to be secured, because if it's private, confidential information on the server, on the computer, it's just as private and confidential on that external hard drive or that backup tape or that DVD. I'll click Cancel, back into the Office button, back into Manage, and now let's choose Database Properties. This seems fluffy because what I'm doing is I'm giving my file a title and an author and a manager and a company, but If you have a lot of files that exist on your servers, on your file shares, you can add some keywords or some categories, and then as people do searches, they'll be able to find this. I never think it's a bad idea to describe your information or to document your information, as we talked about earlier. Most of these are straightforward. On the General tab, this is where you can see the size of your database. On Statistics, you can take a look at the last time it was modified or accessed, which might be something you'll use if you realize that there's some data that was upset or something happened and you want to locate when it occurred. The Contents, this really is telling you how many tables, how many queries, and so on down the line exist in this file. On the Custom tab, you can really work in an environment that a lot of people are accessing and checking items out or making changes. You can actually assign items to specific people, and each time you make a selection, you have different items that you can select and different values that you can select. So department, maybe the department that's looking at this is the marketing department, and I could choose add, and now I've added them down there for information. So it's called custom because you can work with this to add more information that it's going to be tied to your database but might not make sense to hold within your data. Sometimes people refer to this as metadata. I'll click, well, OK, since I did make a change. Back into the Office button, we have a couple other features. We have the ability to go into Access Options here, and it's very large, so I'll resize it. Access always makes it this large. We'll start with some of the fluff. On the popular area here, we get to choose, are we going to see screen tips? When I hover my mouse over a button, will I see a label regarding what that is? Color scheme, my default file format. This could be an important piece for any of your Office products. When I click Save, when I create a new file, it is Access 2007. That's good for me, but if I'm working with people who are using Access 2002, I want my default file format to be an older version because 2002 doesn't understand 2007 because it didn't exist yet, but 2007 is backwards compatible. I have a default database folder. Whenever I create a new database, it goes in my documents, and I like to just go with the general order, but of course, if I was from Thailand or working in Thailand, I could choose that as my default database order. Well, these are my usernames, and my language settings are pretty straightforward. My current database allows me to actually give it names, the application title, icons. We'll get into that when we create the nugget on putting an entire application together. Do I want to see the status bar? Hey, do I want to use special keys? So these are all different items. I'm not going to take you through them one by one. I want you to know that you used to have options under your Tools menu for options in all your Office products. Now it's in your Office button in the upper left-hand corner. Data sheet is regarding what my tables and queries look like in data sheet view. Do I want to have grid lines that show horizontal and vertical? Yeah, that's pretty nice. I do like that. Alternate background color is something that's new by default in Access 2007. So you'll have one row that's white, one that's gray, one that's white, one that's gray, and it does make it easier for you to understand the information. Object designers, I have my default for my table design, my query design, forms, and reports. I usually go with all of the defaults. Proofing, hey, you can't get away from spell check no matter where you go. Do you want it? Do you want to add your own autocorrect option? So anytime you spell database incorrectly, it fixes that spelling for you. On the advanced area, here is where I can choose what happens when I'm actually working in Access. For example, when I click in a field, I want to select all the text in that field instead of putting my cursor at the beginning of the field. When I use my arrow keys on my keyboard, I want it to go to the next field. I want it to confirm record changes. Maybe not, but it is a default. My default direction is left to right. I think that sounds pretty good, and my cursor movement is logical. What am I displaying? Okay, here are the basics for your margins as well as your general items. Customize is where you can choose what you see on that little toolbar that has now Save, Undo, and Redo. This little toolbar right up here by your Office button. You could add, for example, you could add the print button there if you wanted to. Quick print, add. Now I'm going to have that up on that little toolbar. Add-ins. I said we were going to come back to this. In order to have add-ins available, you first have to go out to Microsoft.com. In Download Add-ins, you can do a search. One of the add-ins is what you see right here for my Access Database Engine Conflict Resolver. But another add-in is so that you can save your information as a PDF file or as an XPS file. So first you download it, and then you can go to the Manage area. I've got COM add-ins. Notice here, this is a COM add-in. When I choose Go, it says, okay, this add-in's available. Do you want to use it? I can put a check mark there and choose to add it in. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to go back into the Office button to Access Options. We're still in add-ins, and show you have other add-ins as well. There are Access add-ins that you can go to. When I choose Go, it shows me what are available, or I could add new. If I download them and I haven't installed them yet, I can select them from wherever they were downloaded, and then I can add them in, or uninstall them if you realize that you do not like those after all. The last item here is Resources. I have to resize this window again. Run Microsoft Office Diagnostics. If you seem to be having a problem, you can choose Diagnose, and it will run through, and it will try to help you out. So check for known solutions. It'll do a memory diagnostic, compatibility, hard disk, the physical disk, and setup diagnostic. You can even click this and understand what diagnostics will do for you. Once it goes through and checks the health of your system, it will give you recommendations on how to fix them. And of course, you can contact Microsoft, you can activate Office, which you have to do because Bill Gates does not like pirates. You can go to Microsoft Online. You can find out all the information regarding your version of Access. And lastly, up here I skipped it because we'll come back to that with security. You can get updates to make sure that your system has the most secure, we'll call them bug fixes or security fixes that Microsoft has out there on the market. So the key here is on your database tools. You have all sorts of information that will really help you to be a proactive administrator. The thing that I want you to take away most from this is that you need to have your wits about you. You have to know who's in your database, what your data is, make it available, make sure that it's backed up to a separate physical location in case you have a problem with your main database. And just know that you have diagnostics, you have the ability to repair. You can also work with the various options just to make that environment exactly like you want it to be. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.